Welcome to the Gentleman Project podcast. I am Kirk Chug.
And I'm Cory Moore.
Today we are going to talk about a little bit of the backstory of the Gentleman Project. We've had some feedback from some of our listeners talking about what is the Gentleman Project, where did it come from, what's the name about, and kind of what the backstory is of why the Gentleman Project exists. And we've alluded to it in a couple of our conversations that we've had on the podcast, but also wanted to kind of bring you up to speed of what it is and so that you're not listening and wondering in future episodes.
Yeah, it's actually a fantastic story. I remember the first time that I heard the Gentleman Project. It was from a friend of Kirk's, and just the name, the Gentleman Project, caught my attention. And I reached out to Kirk and I said, I understand that you're doing something called the Gentleman Project with your kids, and I want to know what it is because that sounds really cool. And that's really how I was introduced.
Yeah.
But Kirk introduced this to ultimately hundreds of people. So tell us like the initial, how this started, you know, the story with your boys.
So I have twin boys. They're 13 now, but when they were 5, almost 6, you know, your kids ask you a lot, like, what'd you do today? And I always referred to the people that I worked with as gentlemen. And I guess I'd done that enough that they had heard that word enough. And then my boys looked at me and kind of said, what's a gentleman? And I don't remember what I told him that day. But I do remember laying in bed at night, and that question really bothered me because I thought, okay, if I don't teach my boys what a gentleman is, they probably aren't going to be one. And 2, they're probably going to get influence from the outside world of what a gentleman is. And I don't think that those two things jive. What my definition of a gentleman is and what the world's definition of a gentleman is probably not the same. Mine doesn't have anything to do with a gentleman's club. You know, a lot of times people say, oh, it's the gentleman's club instead of the Gentleman Project. And you know the difference between those two terms. And that's not what I wanted my boys to grow up thinking a gentleman was. So I laid there that night and I thought, I need to develop some type of a way to give this information that I have in my heart of what I hope my boys become someday to my kids. But they're 6. They're almost 6. So they're smart kids, but they're still really little, but they were ready for some information. So I thought I'm going to have to teach my kids something. And we do an elk hunt camp. We pretty much just go up and hang out with the guys of the family up in Bondurant, Wyoming. And I had this picture of my boys with their arm around each other, standing next to the fire at their first man camp is what we call it. And I blew that up and put it behind a piece of glass and hung it on the wall of their bedroom. And I think the initial conversation of, hey boys, I want to do something with you and I'm going to need your help. I want to teach you how to be gentlemen, and I think I've got a way that we can do that. And the stars in their eyes at 5 years old looking at me like, okay, what is this? It was just magic. And I hung this thing on their wall. I gave it to them for their birthday. So we went hunting, and then like the next week I took a picture of them at man camp, hung it on the ... and it just said, a gentleman is ... And I used the bottom part of it as kind of poster sized. I used the bottom of it as a whiteboard. And I would fill that in with things I wanted to teach them. A gentleman is honest. What does that mean? And I told them every night, you guys go in and sit on the bed, and I will come in and we'll talk. And we'll have a discussion about what's on that board. And it could be, you know, a gentleman knows how to tie knots. A gentleman knows how to groom himself properly. Or it could be character and leadership, anything. And what started to happen was every night, whether I wanted to or not, my boys were sitting on the edge of the bed, waiting for me to come in and talk to them about things I've always wanted to teach my sons. And it gave me this venue to be able to say, hey, I've got something else I want to teach you. Are you guys ready? Because I think we've mastered this. What we ended up doing, and it was just kind of fly by the seat of your pants. This was totally something that I was just pulling out of thin air. And I went to erase the first thing on the board because I thought, okay, we've done that. That was awesome. And I went to erase it and put something else on, and I thought to myself, you should take a picture of that. So I took a picture of what we wrote, and the first thing was, a gentleman does hard things without complaining. And we had talked about it, and I think that that's a key to success in life and business and family and really anything you do. If it's hard, it's probably worth doing. If it's not hard, probably not. So don't shy away from hard things. And I had these really in-depth, cool conversations with my sons for like a week and a half about one thing, and they were talking back to me. And I said, what do you think we could go do to show each other that we've learned that a gentleman can do hard things? And they said, we could hike to the top of Ben Lomond Peak, which is almost 10,000 feet. And it's right outside our front door. It's the biggest thing in the world to a 5-year-old. There's nothing bigger than that mountain to a 5-year-old. And I said, okay. So we hiked that mountain. And they drew a picture of it in this little book. We started to write things down in a little leather-bound journal, and they would write whatever was on the board in their little chicken scratch handwriting. Like they were just learning their letters and how to write. So we had this great conversation. We had an activity, and then we decided once we'd learned it, we'd write it in this book. And then I write a little letter to them on the opposite page and told them what we learned, how proud of them I was, where I learned it from sometimes, and why I hope they keep that as something, a quality moving forward in their life. And this book started to become like this living, breathing memory book of the most cool conversations you could ever hope to have with your kid. And I was like, this is magical. I started being a better disciplinarian because I wasn't using fear. I would be like, hey, does a gentleman talk to his mother like that? And they would self-correct. Sorry, Mom, I shouldn't have said that. And my wife looked at me and just said, whatever you're doing with these boys, keep doing it because this is really good stuff.
Love that.
So anyway, I started to talk to some people about it, and I guess Terry was one of them. And then she talked to you, and we knew each other because I've made your suits, and you called me and said, what the heck is the Gentleman Project, and why have you not told me about it?
Yeah. So I heard that story when I asked Kirk, and I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this is so simple and yet so powerful. You're being a very purposeful dad. You're taking your knowledge and the things in your heart that you feel are important to you, these what I call true north principles, and you're delivering them to these little 5 and 6 year old boys in such an amazing way. And they're internalizing them, and they're feeling their love of their dad. And I thought, I have to do this. This is amazing. This is so cool. I think all of us as dads think to ourselves, well, I want to be a good dad. And there's probably a few things I have in my back pocket that my parents taught me. And I certainly had fantastic parents. But I was so intrigued by this idea of purposefully teaching my own kids, like Kirk was, about true north principles, about what it means to be a gentleman. And of course, my daughter needed to be involved too. So what it means to be a lady. And I told Kirk at that time, I said, Kirk, I was so inspired by what he was doing. I said, no matter what I do in my career, no matter what happens, if you could inspire 1 or 2 other dads to do what you're doing, it'll be more important than anything I could ever do in my entire career. And so I just told Kirk, you got to do more with this, man. You've got to inspire as many people as you possibly can.
Well, and like looking back at those conversations that you and I had in the very beginning days of what does that mean? Does that mean books? Does that mean events? Does that mean like, how do you spread this message of intentional fatherhood to more people? And during the course of all this, you have to realize, like, I'm still struggling. Like, this was not some magic pill that I took and then all of a sudden I was a great dad. I've always loved my kids. And it's hard to screw up a kid too bad if you love them really hard. But I wasn't being intentional. I wasn't taking the time that I had with my kids, because honestly, at that point, I'm building a business and I had like maybe 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the night, right before bed. And I was default. That was the only time I saw them. I was often gone before they got up, and I often came home either after dinner or for dinner. And then with young kids, after dinner is bedtime. So that was kind of just the default time. But what it started to do was it started me thinking more intentionally about what am I doing with the time I do have with my kids. And I found for me that 10 to 15 minutes of conversation about things with substance in it was more important to my kids than spending an hour watching a movie with them. And so it was just like, it was concentrated fatherhood. And my kids felt it. My daughter was very captivated by it. And we started to do the same thing with her. And she enjoyed doing the Gentleman Project. And what it does is it gives you like a starting point, right? We never told people what to put in the books. We never told people this is what a gentleman is. It was just totally authentic. I mean, the Gentleman Project name came from 2 5-year-old boys.
Yeah, tell that story about how the actual name came about.
Just the story that I just told, that is just what we called it at my house. The boys were like, can we go do the Gentleman Project? And it was gentleman, singular, M-A-N. And that's the way we said it. And when we developed the Gentleman Project, I changed it to an E, because I realized that I was so much more aware of what I was doing as a gentleman or as a father it was a double-edged sword, and they got it. And so did I, because what happened was it wasn't always me saying, what do we put on the board next? My boys had a piece of paper sitting on their nightstand that had a list of things that they had observed other people in their life, like grandfathers, uncles, teachers, doing. And they said, I think this is something a gentleman does. I want to talk about this next. So it wasn't even me always saying, what is it? They had investment in the project and they named it.
So there is a story that I remember you telling me that I think was pretty cool. And it was really a simple thing, but at one time or another, you taught your boys that opening a door for others, and especially ladies, was what a gentleman would do. And I remember that story. So I was wondering if you would share that with us.
No, you say that and I have this picture pop into my head because it was right around that time. Like, I sell suits for a living, right? So my little boys always wanted to be in a little 3-piece suit or something to go to church. And I remember we had talked about this. They hop out of the car and they see people walking into the church that has double doors with a foyer. So one of them grabs the front door and they stand there like little doormen with their little fedora hats and a 3-piece suit on. And each of them grabs a door and opens it for the people that normally they would have had the door held open for them. They were 6 years old, but they took the initiative because that was what a gentleman does. We had just learned that week at home. And as the people walked past, they would say, thank you. What a gentleman you are. And it reinforced 100% what I had just taught at home. Then people backed me up. And when they said, look at you guys are such little gentlemen. They were like, I am becoming exactly what my dad said I would.
So cool.
And it was super powerful because I didn't ask anybody to call them that, but we've talked about this on the podcast before. Like, when somebody that's not your dad teaches you the same thing that your dad has taught you or your mom has taught you, it reinforces from an outside source some type of magical, oh, my dad was telling me that and it's true, not just taking it at face value that it's something that my dad said, it must be true. But when more people than just your dad tell you the same exact thing, it just reinforces it. And you can be that for other dads too. So
yeah,
anyway.
no, you know what? In fact, I want to bring this up. One of the best things I've done is listen to our podcasts with my kids. And now it's not dad telling them what's important in life, what true north principles are important. It's actually other fathers, right? And that's been pretty fun to share these podcasts with them and listen to them with them, because I can see they're having aha moments, and other people are explaining concepts to them that I explained differently. Right. And now they're hearing it in a different way. Yeah. And that's actually been really powerful. So for listeners, I think listening to some of these podcasts with your kids is a really cool, fun thing to do.
Sure. And I think we did that on a road trip. My little 9-year-old was like, Dad, can we listen to your podcast? Because we were listening to some other podcasts. And she said, I want to listen to Dad's podcast. And so we listened to a couple of episodes.
I was pretty early talking to you about the Gentleman Project. It was somewhat early in the process. That's been how many years ago now that you started the Gentleman Project with your boys?
They were almost 6. So that would have been 2013.
2013. So since then, I wasn't the only one who asked Kirk, what is this? And Kirk would bring it up in conversation with people, when he was doing business with them or at networking events. And eventually you have had hundreds of people with journals in their homes teaching their kids this way. Talk to us about how that happened and what that felt like to have so many people do that.
Well, I realized pretty early on that there were a lot more dads out there just like me. I was in my early 30s. I was trying to build a business, provide for my family. I was gone a lot. I thought about it more at night after my kids had gone to bed. And I think, what did I do today to influence my kid's life? Like nothing. I provided for them, but what did I do to influence their life today? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And that bothered me. And so in a lot of my networking conversations, I built my business on the backbone of networking and talking with people face to face. And instead of talking about what I did for a living, which is exciting, but I would ask questions like, what are you doing to connect with your kids? Like some of the same questions that I ask on the podcast, because that's a powerful question, because you're either going to get one of two answers. You're going to get a great idea that you can try too. Or if the guy's honest and he feels this way, he'll say, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm not doing anything. He's feeling just like I felt. And if somebody's willing to open up and be that vulnerable and honest, like, man, I don't know. I'm really struggling with my kids right now. The relationship that's built between those two people gets deeper faster than any other conversation I have ever been a part of. And I made a lot of really good friends by asking questions about fatherhood. And if they'd open up, we'd end up going to lunch. We'd end up maybe doing business, but we wouldn't be talking about business. We'd be talking about fatherhood stuff. And I'd share some good ideas with them. They'd throw some back at me. And these became super powerful relationships. And that's kind of how it grew organically. And it grew organically geographically, because that was kind of the people that I had talked to about it, and the people that they talked to about it were kind of, local. So those relationships became important as we started to do something with the Gentleman Project. And that's why we're such good friends. Like, we can say a lot of other things that we have in common, and, you know, belief systems and things that we like to do. But our relationship is built on like conversations we had about kids and fatherhood.
Totally. And that is really why this podcast was born. Not that we didn't do a lot of other things to try to spread this idea of purposeful fatherhood. Kirk and I started having brainstorming sessions, and we would say, well, what if we could have 1,000 people be better parents? And what if we could have, you know, thousands of kids who are being taught to be gentlemen? And then, well, why not try for millions of fathers to be better and millions of kids to be gentlemen, you know? And that's why we're doing this. That's why the podcast, that's why we decided to turn the conversations Kirk was having every day with those right next to him that he was networking with, and turn that into something that a bigger audience could hear those same discussions, that a bigger audience could look in the mirror and say, oh yeah, I could do things a little different. I could do things a little better. And you know what? This doesn't have to be hard. We can do some simple things like just talking to our kids about a true north principle, potentially put it in a journal or on the wall, on a poster. So I know that Kirk's inspired at least hundreds and hundreds. But the goal, of course, of the podcast is to inspire as many people as possible. And what a fantastic, wonderful thing that you've started.
Oh, thank you. I probably wouldn't have done anything with it had it not been for you. So I owe that to you. And there were other people involved in the beginning as well that were very influential, instrumental in creating something, getting it started, keeping it going. And I owe a lot to them as well. What I found was it also morphs a little bit. Like what started with a journal and a thing on the wall, with my boys has become more of a way we live, right? The way we act. And it's provided kind of a framework for discussion and I would say like vocabulary that we use at home. And they know I'm trying. I know they're trying, and that's pretty magical. But like we don't keep a journal and write on a whiteboard as dads and 13-year-olds. They've moved past that style of the Gentleman Project, but they still helped create it. And I'll be grateful for them and my wife for supporting it forever. We've done texts. We've sent hundreds of thousands of texts, 2 years worth of these things we call the daily doodads. And it was something you can do every day when you come home. And we're working on putting together a book of those for listeners if they're interested in getting some inspiration. A lot of times, like my kids would crawl up on my lap when I got home. Hey, Dad, do something with me. What do you want to do? And the answer to that question is often, I just got home. I just want to sit here. Right. And I don't want to think about something that I have to do. So premise behind the Daily Doodad was give a dad something that he doesn't have to plan. He doesn't have to pay for. It's a simple idea. Simple as go fly paper airplanes together. So you can fly a paper airplane the farthest. Simple idea like that will give you like 10 to 30 minutes of fun with your kids. So my dad used to fly paper airplanes with me.
That's cool.
So,
yeah, I love the Daily Doodads. It always just kind of, the other thing it reminded me of when we were sending these Daily Doodads out, it was usually around
4:45.
Yeah, something like that. And so I'm on my way home and I get this text about an idea for a Daily Doodad. And it just reminded me, when you get home, you're going to be tired. You're not going to want to do anything, but you can take 10 minutes to be a good dad and a purposeful dad. And then the thing I loved about the journals and still love is that that's something that can be carried on for generations. Imagine that your boys are sitting down, which will happen, with their sons or son or whoever they're, whatever kids they have, and showing them that journal and saying, I want to show you what my father taught me. My father taught me how to be a gentleman, and I'm going to teach you. And this is a family legacy now. And they start at the beginning and they walk through your book that you wrote in, that you decided were the principles of what a gentleman is and really what a good man is, right?
Yeah.
They're authentic. They're yours. Not that you don't get them. I get ideas from a million different places. I get ideas for Gentleman Project ideas from Kirk. I get them from books I've read, I get them from church related lessons. But the beauty of the Gentleman Project is that you can be teaching true north principles like honesty, integrity, and things like that, or manners, like opening a door for a young lady or whatever that you feel like is important to your kids. And I always like the fact that this isn't something that's coming from me.
Right.
That being said, I told Kirk many times, I'm just not as good at this as you are. And sometimes I just trying to think of what is the next Gentleman Project keeps me from doing it, even though that's the most simple thing in the world. So I want to tell the listeners, we're actually working on a book right now.
We are, and I'm super pumped about it.
Yeah, that's a list of all these Gentleman Project ideas in one book, so that as a father, to make it even easier, because I needed this, I still do, to make it even easier, you can flip through the pages, choose one, have that conversation with your kids, and just make it even easier to teach them some of these principles.
Yeah, it's gonna be really cool. I'm excited for it. We've done some copy, we've got some layout to do still, and some illustrations, but we're hoping to have this done, and we'll let you know where and when you can get it when it's available. But yeah, we never really wanted to be prescriptive, but at the same time, there's certain leadership and self-mastery things that are just good principles to teach and to internalize yourself, because you'll find if you start to purposely teach your kids, guess what? You're not going to go do the opposite in front of your kids. There's like this inherent desire to not be a hypocrite in front of your kids, especially when your kids understand what a hypocrite is. And so it's going to be a fun book to be able to say, hey, we're not going to tell you what to teach your kids, but here's some ideas. And the other thing, Cory, that I kind of wanted to touch on that the Gentleman Project has provided me as a dad, because it started to be more like teach your kids these things, make sure that they grow up to be contributing, helpful humans. It also changed me, and I kind of touched on this a little bit, but the relationships and the community that I created with other dads is not something that we give ourselves the license to do. We don't give ourselves a license to go to lunch with buddies or go to golfing with buddies and talk about, man, I have had a really rough week with my teen daughter. Like, this is the stuff I'm dealing with, and I don't know what to do. And it's like eating me. And to be able to sit down with somebody and say, man, have you got some ideas for me? Because this is tough for me right now. Like that vulnerability of, I don't have it figured out, man. Like nobody gave me a list of things to do. When this happens, then do this. It's all just ad hoc as you go. And to have somebody that I can come to, and we do this before the podcast, like be completely honest with our listeners. Like Cory and I are that for each other. And when we're struggling with something at home, before the podcast and before we record, we'll often sit here for half an hour and talk about, man, it was a tough week. We did it this morning, And for me, that is so valuable to be able to talk to another dad about what I'm going through. It makes it so that I don't feel like I am completely alone in this world. and dealing with something that I feel is just mine. Because there's probably a million dads just like you dealing with the same things, with the same issues with their kids as you are, and we never talk about it. And I want to change that.
You know what we ought to do is take this opportunity to ask the listeners to reach out if they have questions they'd like us to ask dads. You know, if you have a question in your mind and you're like, well, I'd love the Gentleman Project podcast to ask that to some of the dads there and that they're interviewing, where would they go to send us a question, Kirk?
Go to info@thegentlemanproject.com.
And that's gentleman
M-E-N.
with M-E-N.
Yep.
Yeah.
info@thegentlemanproject.com. Or you can reach out to us on social media at the Gentleman Project Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. You can find us on all those platforms. And I hope that today, I can literally, and I've said this hundreds of times, I could sit and talk about all of the cool stories that I've had with the Gentleman Project and my own kids for hours. And I'd bore you to death with all of them. But we have I can flip open to a page in my boy's journal and go, I remember what we did there. And without knowing it, I had kind of created this, okay, we're going to create structure. We're going to create habit. We're going to create connection. We're going to have dialogue. We're going to write it down. We're going to repeat it. And then we're going to go do something together that creates a memory that cements what we just talked about for the last 3 days or 3 weeks. I remember a couple of those, we didn't move on because we had not learned it. And I could tell by behavior that they had not internalized. And I'm like, okay, guys, we're just going to talk about this again tonight. What today could we have done different? And it's like magic, right? Oh yeah, I could have done that different, because they want to move on to their next lesson. They want to learn what the next thing a gentleman does is. And so you create these memories. And then I can open up to any one of those pages and go, oh yeah, when we learned that a gentleman takes care of people less fortunate than himself, or stands up for other people, or stands up for people who can't stand up for themselves, I remember what we did, and so do they.
That's amazing. It's really quite perfect. And we probably should have started the entire podcast with this podcast.
We probably should have, but
we didn't. But we had enough people say, don't you think you ought to tell the story of what in the world the Gentleman Project is and how it started? There
are enough people, and there are videos out there. If you wanted to Google the Gentleman Project, you probably already know these stories. But
yeah. Well, I kind of want to finish the podcast with a little something personal. I want to shout out to my 3 beautiful, amazing children, Indiana, Mac, and Navy Jane. I love you with everything I've got, and I'm so thankful I'm your dad. And I wish I was better, but I'm thrilled that I'm that guy.
Wow. Thanks, Cory. I think we all feel that way about our kids. Pretty cool for them to be able to hear that from their dad.
Well, thank you everyone for listening. This has been a fantastic podcast. My hero, my inspiration to being a better father, Kirk Chug. I can't thank you enough for truly changing my life and my life with my kids by inspiring me with the Gentleman Project.
Oh, thank you, Cory. It's hopefully it's something that they talk about at my funeral someday. And
I'm sure they will.
I probably helped a couple of dads, and thanks for being a part of it.
Well, you've already done something amazing with your life. So thanks for your dedication, hard work, focus to inspire so many.
And thanks to our listeners. We know that you invest time in podcasts. This is not something that you just click like on and move on with your day. You take the time to listen to the podcast, and it's an investment. We try to keep it under an hour. so that you can use them for commutes or whatever you want to inspire you. These are published on Monday mornings, and we hope that it kind of gives you that Monday morning boost to attack life and be the best dad that you can be for your kids. So thank you for our downloads are actually looking really great for a new podcast. We're killing it, and we appreciate you like talking about it, sharing it with the people that you care about, and investing the time and listening to who we bring on. And we hope that we can get a good cross section of people that can inspire and help you become a better dad. So thanks again. I'm Kirk Chug.
And I'm Cory Moore.
We're with the Gentleman Project Podcast. We'll talk to you soon.